Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I moved to the mountains to disappear, but trouble found me anyway. What began as a quiet retreat turned into a battle for my home, my privacy, and my freedom. When the local HOA tried to claim control, they didn't expect a war. They definitely didn't expect me to win. I didn't move to the mountains to make friends. I moved here to be left the hell alone. After 16 years of clinging to glass office towers and security contracts in Los Angeles, my spine gave out before my temper ever did. One fall on a wet rooftop while installing a thermal perimeter sensor did me in. It was supposed to be a 2-week recovery, turned into permanent nerve damage and a medical retirement I hadn't planned on. So I cashed out what I could, told my clients to call someone else, and bought a cabin up in the Sierra Nevadas with the kind of view that makes your heart go quiet. The place wasn't fancy, more stone than timber, the kind of house that creaked honestly in the wind. But it was mine. A long gravel drive, no visible neighbors, no noise but the trees, and, best of all, no HOA. I confirmed that before I even saw the property in person. I had my lawyer check twice, then I checked myself. No community association jurisdiction, no dues, no bylaws, no fluorescent notices taped to my door about whether my trash bin was unsightly. Just me and nature and whatever I decided to do with my land. The edge of the property did run near a fancy new development called Granite Crest. The first time I drove by it on the way to the grocery store in June Lake, I noticed the kind of houses that all looked like they came from a catalog called Mountain Modern Chic. All stone veneers, composite wood, security gates that probably cost more than my truck, and signs. So many signs. Residents only. Private security patrol. Community guidelines enforced. All the warning signals of over-involved Karens in pastel windbreakers, armed with clipboards and passive-aggressive smiles. I didn't give them much thought until late August. That's when I met her. I was working on upgrading my entry gate, installing an old-school mechanical backup lock because smart systems fail when it gets below zero, when I heard heels crunching gravel. Not boots. Heels. I looked up and saw a woman in her late 50s, blonde bob tight as a military cut, striding up in Lululemon pants, holding a leather portfolio like it contained nuclear codes. She stopped a polite 10 feet from me and gave me that smile you see in HOA newsletters next to words like community stewardship. Good morning. I'm Karen Stanbridge, president of the Granite Crest Homeowners Association. I didn't respond right away. I just blinked and tightened the bolt in my hand until the ratchet squeaked. She waited. I sighed. Garrett Sloan. I don't live in Granite Crest. She chuckled like I'd said something adorably ignorant. Oh, I'm aware. But your property does border our north access road, and since you're within our general vicinity, we consider you part of the extended community. I wiped my hands on my jeans and gave her my best blank stare. You mind if I ask what you need, Ms. Stanbridge? Well, she said, flipping open her portfolio. As part of our Community Emergency Preparedness Protocol, we're collecting contact information and emergency key sets from nearby homeowners, just in case of fire, earthquake, gas leaks. You know how unpredictable the Sierras can be. I stared at her, deadpan. You want my house keys? 3 copies, yes, in sealed envelopes clearly marked. 1 for the HOA security team, 1 for the safety coordinator, and 1 for the regional lockbox. I nearly laughed. You can't be serious. She blinked, as if no one had ever dared say no to her in her entire professionally micromanaged life. It's a safety protocol. Many homeowners are enthusiastic about participating. It's for your own good. Ms. Stanbridge, I said evenly. I'm not part of your HOA. I'm not subject to your protocols. And no one, not the county, not CAL FIRE, not God himself, is getting a key to my house unless I say so. And I say no. Her smile stayed, but something behind her eyes sharpened. I understand. Of course, I'll mark you as non-compliant for now. But I do hope you reconsider. Emergencies don't wait for paperwork. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the road, like she hadn't just asked a total stranger to give her 3 copies of his house keys. A week later, I got a letter in a navy blue envelope marked Granite Crest Homeowners Association, Private. Inside was a courtesy notice, thanking me for my time and reminding me that community cohesion required shared responsibility. Also enclosed, a blank form to list primary key holders and 3 color-coded tags marked HOAS, HOAC, and HOAR. A sticky note attached read, "Still time to opt in. Just drop keys at the front gate kiosk." I tossed it straight into the wood stove. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The first snowfall came early that year, mid-October, wet and heavy. I woke up to 6 inches of dense powder and 2 feet of silence, the kind of silence that makes you realize how far you are from anyone who'd care if something went wrong, which, for me, was the appeal. I was halfway through shoveling my long-ass driveway, manual labor I didn't particularly enjoy, but also didn't trust anyone else to do, when I noticed a group of men in neon orange vests about 50 yards down the slope. 4 of them. 2 shoveling, 1 operating a plow attachment on a golf cart-sized utility vehicle, and 1 supervising with a clipboard. At first, I thought the county had sent someone by mistake. Then I noticed the logo, Granite Crest HOA. I stomped down the hill, slipping once but catching myself on instinct, and stopped just short of the guy with the clipboard. "You lost?" I asked. He looked up, young, polite, clueless. "We've been assigned to maintain the north access corridor, sir. Snow clearance and debris management." "That's not a corridor," I said, pointing at the drive. "That's my private driveway." "Oh," he said, checking the clipboard. "Well, this section was marked for extended services by direction of the HOA president, Karen Stanbridge." "Funny," I said, "because I didn't request anything, authorize anything, or pay for anything." He gave a half shrug. "We were just told it was part of our perimeter buffer zone. We can stop, but we've already logged the hours." I didn't need to guess what was coming. 3 days later, an envelope showed up with a bill for $476 and a glossy pamphlet titled Community Integration Services. Optional, but appreciated. I ignored it. A week later, I got a second notice past due. Then came the nonsense. One morning, I found a yellow tag taped to my gate that read, "Architectural violation, unauthorized perimeter design." Apparently, my fence, steel posts with interlocking wooden panels, didn't conform with established visual guidelines, which would have been hilarious if it weren't so intrusive. I wasn't part of Granite Crest. They had no more authority over my fence than they did over my underwear drawer, but that didn't stop them from treating my property like an unruly patch in their manicured universe. Then the internet went down. I called my ISP, expecting some generic outage. Instead, I got an apologetic tech who said, "Actually, there was a service transfer request, new address owner override. It was submitted by Granite Crest HOA's tech liaison. You authorized that, right?" I did not. I drove to town that afternoon and straight into my provider's office. After a round of verification and some legal threats, they restored my account and locked it against third-party changes. But the fact that they'd even tried to transfer ownership of my damn internet service was so beyond the line it didn't even need a punchline. I filed an official cease and desist letter with the HOA, copied to my lawyer and the county clerk. I told them plainly, no further contact, no services, no bills, no entry onto my land. I wasn't part of their fiefdom. I didn't owe them a damn thing. They responded by leaving a laminated flyer under my windshield at the general store. Friendly reminder, non-participation may affect future emergency assistance response times. Subtle. The next encounter was a man I'd never seen before who stopped at the top of my driveway and started taking pictures of my truck, my cabin, my mailbox. I walked up with my phone recording and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. He smiled, real slick, just gathering data for the HOA safety assessment report. I told him if I caught him on my land again, I'd assume he was casing the place and I'd treat it accordingly. The next morning, I upgraded my security cams to thermal and infrared. You'd think that would send a message. Instead, the mail brought me a letter marked Final Notice, Outstanding Balance Due, total $728. Services never ordered, violations never agreed to, standards never accepted. HOA Fantasy World made flesh. They wanted to build pressure, create paper trails, invent a sense of compliance through attrition. I didn't budge. I sent a second cease and desist, this time through my attorney. Sent copies to the sheriff's department, just for good measure. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I started documenting everything. Every flyer, every picture, every intrusion, every so-called service they performed on my land without permission, because something told me they weren't going to stop with snowplows and photocopies. By early November, I'd learned to expect HOA mail like junk flyers, relentless, pointless, and usually insulting to my intelligence. But the one that came on a Tuesday morning was different. It was hand-delivered, sealed in a red envelope, and it wasn't left in my mailbox. It was taped directly to my front door with a sticker that read, "Urgent Compliance Request." Inside, I found a folded letter titled Community Safety Enforcement Notice. It claimed that due to my continued refusal to engage in collective risk mitigation, I was now in violation of Granite Crest's regional safety protocols. The penalty? A non-cooperation fee of $2,900. I stared at the letter for a full minute before laughing out loud. It was like watching someone try to write a traffic ticket for a car parked in a different city. They had no jurisdiction. None. But the paper looked official, dense legal language, references to fire codes, public safety statutes, even a line claiming I had entered implied consent by residing within the operational sphere of the community. I scanned the thing, emailed it to my lawyer, then walked outside and tore it into confetti on my porch. 2 days later, Karen came back. She didn't even knock. I saw her from the upstairs window, walking up the drive like she owned it. She had a second person with her, a younger man with a leather binder and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. I met them halfway down the path, arms crossed. "Mr. Sloan," Karen said, her tone somewhere between disappointed school principal and cult recruiter, "we've had multiple reports of architectural noncompliance and perimeter concerns." "I'm not in your HOA," I said flatly. "We're aware," said the sunglasses guy, not looking up from his binder, "but your residence still affects the safety profile of the greater community." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "You're on private property. Leave." Karen took a breath. "We're requesting one final time that you allow our Emergency Readiness Committee to inspect your home's ingress and egress points. Fire season is approaching. Your refusal to participate puts others at risk." "No. We also still haven't received your emergency key sets," she added, as though this were a normal thing to say to a stranger. I laughed. "I'd rather nail them to a tree." Karen's smile cracked. "That can be interpreted as hostile conduct under Section 16 of the Community Compliance Code." "Not on my land, it can't," I said, and pointed to the gate. "Out." They left. Slowly. Deliberately. Like people who weren't used to hearing no. A few days later, I got a newsletter in the mail from Granite Crest HOA. Right there, in bold text on page 2, it said, "We remind all residents and adjacent neighbors that safety begins with transparency. Uncooperative individuals increase community risk. Non-participants may be flagged for future emergency deprioritization." I called my lawyer. We filed a preemptive notice with the county sheriff documenting continued harassment. I figured the worst they could do was keep sending envelopes. I was wrong. It started with the locks. I'd gone into Bishop for a supply run, groceries, propane, ammo, the usual, and was gone maybe 6 hours. When I got back, something felt off the second I turned up the drive. My gate opened slower than usual, as if someone had manually interfered with the latch mechanism. The gravel showed tire tracks that weren't mine, fresh and deep, curving where no one should have been driving. And then I saw it. My front door was shut, but the keypad entry system had been removed. Not damaged. Removed. Cleanly, precisely, like it had been done with tools by someone who knew what they were doing. In its place was a cheap brass deadbolt that didn't match the rest of the hardware. The porch light had been replaced with a newer LED model that wasn't mine. I didn't even try the key. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and called the sheriff's department. They said a deputy would be dispatched as soon as possible. I waited outside, pacing, taking photos of everything. I noticed the utility box on the side of the house had a new lock on it too. A laminated sign was taped to the window. Notice of removal, unauthorized resident. Per HOA Resolution GCE 073 entry is prohibited. Emergency access only. Granite Crest HOA. My fist clenched involuntarily. This wasn't just another bluff or flyer. Someone had physically entered my property and changed the damn locks. The deputy showed up an hour later, a guy named Hughes I'd seen once at a gas station. Friendly, alert, competent. He took one look at the sign, then at me. "Are you Garrett Sloan?" "Yeah." "This your property?" "Deed's in the glove box if you want it." He nodded. "You're not in the HOA?" "Nope. Never was. Never agreed to be. Never signed a thing." He let out a long breath through his teeth and took out his notepad. "You're not the first one. We walked the perimeter together. He noted the altered lock, the sign, the changed porch light. I showed him the tire tracks, the utility box, the missing security camera over the door. He jotted everything down. "Who do you think did it?" he asked. "I've got a damn good guess." That night, I stayed in my truck with the engine running and a shotgun across my lap. I had a spare emergency key hidden inside a fake vent pipe near the back of the cabin, one of the first things I installed when I moved in. At around midnight, I quietly retrieved it, slipped around the back, and tried the rear door. The new lock was jammed. They'd changed it too. I didn't try to force it. I didn't want to be the one breaking into my own house. The next morning, my lawyer and I filed for a restraining order against the Granite Crest HOA and submitted a criminal complaint for trespassing, vandalism, and illegal lockout. Hughes had already filed his report, which helped. While I was waiting at the sheriff's substation for copies of the documents, my phone buzzed. A motion alert from one of the surviving security cams. I pulled up the feed and stared in disbelief. Karen Stanbridge, on my porch. Clipboard in hand, pointing at the door, while a guy with a badge-shaped patch on his jacket drilled a lock into place. She was talking to him like she was in charge of a SWAT team. The timestamp showed it happened the day before, right around noon, probably while I was buying damn trail mix. I downloaded the footage and sent it straight to my lawyer. That afternoon, we added unlawful eviction and destruction of personal property to the complaint. California law takes illegal lockouts seriously, especially when there's no court order, no due process, just a power-hungry HOA acting like they're the sheriff in some Wild West fantasy. The deputy called me that night. "We're treating it as criminal trespass," he said. "Also, unauthorized occupation. We'll get you access tomorrow." But even as he spoke, I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. It was something worse. The next morning, Deputy Hughes met me at the cabin with 2 other officers and a locksmith from the county's approved list. I handed over my ID, signed the property access affidavit, and watched as the guy drilled through the bogus deadbolt like he was popping open a can of soup. The metal core hit the porch with a clang. The door swung open. The inside of my house looked like a hotel room post-checkout. Furniture pushed aside, pictures removed from the walls, my dishes gone, my camping gear piled in a corner, and a goddamn plastic storage container near the window labeled Sloan Unclaimed Contents. I stood there in stunned silence as Hughes stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across the space like we were clearing a crime scene. "I thought this was an eviction," he muttered. It looked staged. On the kitchen counter was a printed sheet with my name, address, and the words, "Occupancy terminated. Resident no longer authorized per HOA Board Directive GC 073. They weren't even trying to hide it. They'd created their own reality and shoved it inside my walls. Hughes called in a property crime unit. They photographed everything, took samples of fingerprints, measured shoe prints in the entry mud. One officer found a broken piece of my security system behind the bookshelf, a wireless repeater unit shattered and unplugged. I showed them the camera footage from the day before. Karen pointing, ordering, coordinating like she was directing a damn stage play. The deputy leaned over the screen and said, "That woman's getting arrested. It's just a matter of time." By noon, I was officially back in possession of my home. But the damage wasn't just physical. The more I looked around, the more I realized how much they'd touched. My food pantry had been emptied. Someone had gone through my desk drawers. I found 2 opened envelopes on the floor with checks still inside, uncashed but exposed. My laptop was gone. My backup drives, too. They hadn't just broken in. They'd searched, cataloged, maybe even copied. And something about that chilled me more than the snow outside. That evening, I reviewed all my surviving security footage, pulling every clip from the cloud. There it was, clear as day, Karen unlocking the gate with what looked like a universal access fob, her badge flashing henchman following behind. A third man, unknown, wearing gloves, carrying a toolbox. They weren't subtle. They didn't need to be. In their minds, they were executing a board resolution. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. He called back 10 minutes later. "This isn't just civil," he said. "This is criminal conspiracy. Illegal eviction, destruction of property, unauthorized surveillance, impersonation of law enforcement, possibly more." We agreed to file a restraining order specifically against Karen personally, in addition to the HOA. The motion included all our evidence, footage, signage, unauthorized service disconnections, false notices, and now, physical intrusion and occupation. Then I called a friend of mine, Benji, ex-cybersecurity guy I used to work with back in the city. Told him I needed some help recovering deleted surveillance data and maybe tracing whoever accessed my systems. His exact words were, "Oh damn, you poked a Karen nest." "Yeah," I replied, "and they think they own my damn mountain." He promised to come up that weekend with his gear. Until then, I did what I always did when I felt like prey. I made my house a fortress again. New locks, emergency power reset, wired cameras instead of wireless, sensor relays that would chirp if someone so much as breathed near the back fence. I even pulled out the trail cams I usually used for watching mountain lions and pointed them at the HOA's boundary trail. I didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, out of fury. They didn't just trespass, they tried to erase me. Benji showed up Saturday morning in his lifted Jeep, a six-pack of cold brew in one hand and a duffel bag that hummed faintly in the other. He took one look at the cabin and let out a low whistle. "You weren't kidding," he said. "They really went scorched earth HOA on you." We got to work right away. He pulled out a modified laptop, an external scanner, and something that looked like a dental tool for electronics. Within minutes, he was digging through my old hard drives, pulling ghost data from wiped sectors and cache files the system logs forgot to clear. By late afternoon, he found the jackpot. "There it is," he said, turning the laptop toward me. "Time-stamped access log. Remote entry through your security system from a Granite Crest IP address. Multiple times. You're telling me they hacked my system?" He nodded. "Probably used a spoofed admin credential. Easy to do if someone gets access physically, which, let's be real, they clearly did. But this proves intent. They weren't just trespassing, they planned it. We printed out the logs, screenshots, everything." Then he paused and tapped a file folder I didn't recognize. "What's this?" He clicked it open, and we both leaned in. It was a recording from my front door camera, a backup video that had failed to upload fully to the cloud. The screen flickered once, then came into focus. Karen stood in the doorway in broad daylight, flanked by the same clipboard-wielding goon as before. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Mr. Sloan refused to cooperate. He chose isolation over safety. That's not acceptable anymore." She turned to the man next to her. "He forfeited the right to live here the day he said no." The video ended. Benji leaned back slowly. That's not even subtle." I copied the file to 3 separate drives and handed one to my lawyer the next morning. He looked like Christmas came early. "This is direct evidence of intent and premeditation," he said. "This isn't just a civil lawsuit anymore. This is criminal, felony-level illegal eviction, conspiracy, unlawful entry, and misuse of authority." We filed formal charges that afternoon, but the real earthquake hit on Monday. A woman named Janice Holbrook showed up at my property unannounced. She was older, maybe late 60s, with shaking hands and a heavy folder clutched to her chest. She introduced herself as a former Granite Crest resident. Used to live 3 houses down from the HOA clubhouse, before the reassignments, as she called them. "I heard what happened to you," she said, sitting on my porch like it was a confessional. "Same thing happened to me, and the Millers, and the Ortizes. We were all told we were in violation of HOA terms, that our homes were being reclaimed for non-compliance. Next thing I knew, they were changing locks while I was at my daughter's house. I felt something cold sink into my gut. "Did you fight it?" I asked. "We tried, but we didn't have video, no digital records. They claimed we'd agreed to temporary relocation for repairs or safety reasons. The paperwork was forged, I think. I didn't even recognize the signature they said was mine." I invited her in. She handed me the folder. Inside were copies of eviction notices, HOA directives, letters full of legal nonsense about compliance thresholds and residential reassignment plans. All unsigned. All carried the same directive ID, GC073, the same as mine. I scanned them all, sent them to my attorney, and asked Janice if she'd be willing to testify. She didn't even hesitate. "They took my house," she said. "They won't take anyone else's." That night, I put up a sign next to my gate. "Private property. Not part of HOA trespassers will be prosecuted, monitored by drones and automated alert systems." Then I activated the motion sensor speakers I'd installed earlier in the week. The next time Karen or her little clipboard army stepped 1 foot past the line, they'd hear a booming voice say, "You are trespassing. Law enforcement has been notified." And this time, it wouldn't be a bluff. The court hearing was set for the following Thursday, a preliminary injunction request paired with our criminal complaint. My lawyer, Rick, looked like a man about to gut a whale with a paperclip. He had everything lined up: the video of Karen, the digital logs, Janice Holbrook's affidavit, and over a dozen pieces of physical evidence logged by the sheriff's office. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I paced the house like a caged animal, checking every lock, verifying every alert system. Benji's laptop was still running diagnostics in the background, pulling remote server traces from the Granite Crest security hub. He hadn't cracked the full encryption yet, but he said it looked like the HOA was storing camera feeds and access logs for properties they didn't even own. "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen," he muttered. "Correction," I said. "It's already here." When we pulled into the county courthouse the next morning, I saw them, Karen and her entourage, 3 men in matching charcoal gray suits, one of whom I recognized from the lockout video. They stood outside the courtroom like it was a red carpet event. Karen was dressed in navy and pearls, chin high, as if she were attending a charity gala instead of a criminal proceeding. Her expression didn't change when she saw me, but mine did. Because standing behind her was a man I hadn't expected to see. Paul Hensley, a county zoning official I'd met during the sale of the cabin years ago. Back then, he'd been polite, efficient. Now he was wearing a Granite Crest lapel pin and whispering something into Karen's ear like a man who'd sold more than his soul. Rick noticed too. "Looks like they've got friends in low places. Any of this gonna shake the judge?" Rick shook his head. "Judge Moreno doesn't play games. She's seen every flavor of HOA garbage. Just stick to the facts." Inside the courtroom, things moved fast. Rick laid out the timeline, the intrusion, the lock change, the footage of Karen declaring I'd forfeited my right to live in my own house. Then came Janice's testimony, strong, clear, heartbreaking. She described how her house had been taken, how the HOA had ignored her calls, then threatened legal action when she tried to return. Karen's defense tried to play it off as community protection policies and unfortunate clerical errors, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Let me get this straight," Judge Moreno said, eyebrows rising. "You executed an unsanctioned removal of a homeowner, changed the locks on private property you do not own, and attempted to reassign the home under an internal directive?" Karen's attorney squirmed. "There was a misunderstanding about jurisdiction." "No, there was a misunderstanding about the law," she snapped. "And your client isn't a government. She's the president of a neighborhood association, not the Department of Homeland Security." The judge granted the injunction in full. Karen and Granite Crest HOA were now legally barred from setting foot on my property, sending me notices, altering any utilities, or communicating through proxies. Violation of the order would result in immediate arrest and contempt charges. Rick filed for discovery right after the hearing. We wanted all internal HOA communications, directives, board meeting minutes, and property modification logs. The judge approved it with a 30-day deadline. That's when things got interesting. Benji, who was still running his digital trace back at my place, called me that evening. Buddy, you might want to see this." He'd managed to mirror a portion of the Granite Crest server using a ghost IP from one of their own routers, something only a real professional could pull off without tripping alarms. On it, an entire folder labeled Redirected Assets. Inside were files on 5 properties: mine, Janice's, the Millers, the Ortiz's, and one more I didn't recognize. Each file included photos, owner bios, copies of fabricated violation notices, board resolution documents, and notes about reassignment viability. It was a hit list. Rick and I drove the flash drive straight to the sheriff's department that night. 2 hours later, a judge signed a warrant. Karen's day of reckoning had officially begun. The raid happened at dawn. 3 unmarked cruisers rolled into the Granite Crest HOA headquarters, formerly a converted model home near the entrance to the gated community. A county deputy knocked on the door, and before the receptionist could even feign confusion, officers were inside, seizing computers, hard drives, document boxes, and security devices. Karen was not present, but 2 board members were detained for questioning, and one of them, Peter Lanning, treasurer, started talking before his coffee was even cold. Apparently, the redirection program wasn't just Karen's little hobby. It was a structured operation. Homes flagged for non-compliance were pre-selected, reviewed, and slowly pressured through violations, fines, and intimidation until the residents gave up or were forcibly locked out. After that, properties were reassigned under fake agreements to community-approved applicants, sometimes for kickbacks or sweetheart leases. My cabin had been the first real failure. I wasn't supposed to fight back. I wasn't supposed to have cameras, logs, a lawyer, or, God forbid, a hacker friend with a chip on his shoulder. When I got the call from Rick confirming the indictments, I pulled over on the side of the road and just sat there, staring out over the pine ridges. He listed the charges one by one: criminal trespass, unlawful eviction, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and fraudulent property transfer. And then came the big one. Karen's getting charged under California Penal Code 518, extortion by fear or under color of authority. That one hit like a thunderclap because it meant prison time, serious time. She's looking at up to 8 years, Rick said, minimum 5. And that's before we factor in the feds. The feds? Yup, one of the reassigned houses used FEMA funding during wildfire reconstruction. That drags in interstate fraud. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I smiled, just a little. By the end of the week, Karen was finally arrested, not at home, not at the HOA office, but at a wine tasting event for community beautification donors at a vineyard 40 miles away. Local reporters caught the whole thing. She wore a blue scarf, large sunglasses, and a scowl you could smell through the screen. The mugshot was glorious. The sheriff's office held a press conference. I stayed home, watching with a beer in hand as they laid it all out. How Karen Stanbridge and select board members orchestrated illegal evictions, altered property records, and used unlicensed security to enforce sham directives. My footage played on the big screen behind them. Benji texted me during the broadcast. "You're on TV, Mountain Man." Hope they used my good side. Granite Crest HOA collapsed like a flan in the sun. Residents demanded emergency meetings. Some were shocked. Others admitted they always thought something was off, but were too afraid to speak. Several began filing civil suits of their own. Within a month, the HOA's bank accounts were frozen under court order. A special investigator was appointed to oversee the unwinding of all fraudulent transactions, and the California Department of Real Estate announced an audit of the entire subdivision. As for me, I wasn't done yet. Rick and I filed a civil suit demanding full compensation for property damage, legal costs, stolen equipment, emotional distress, and defamation. It was a fat claim, backed by mountains of evidence and the state's own criminal case. Janice and the other victims joined as co-plaintiffs. Our case would come later, after the dust settled, but the message was already clear. They came for the wrong man. It took 6 months for the civil case to go to trial. During that time, Karen sat in county lockup, denied bail due to her demonstrated pattern of abuse of authority and risk of retaliation. Granite Crest HOA officially dissolved. The community voted in a temporary committee to manage basic upkeep, trash collection, snow removal, but they didn't want anything resembling the old regime. No one wanted to be caught dead calling themselves board president again. My lawyer, Rick, prepped our team like we were about to take on Wall Street. He organized witness statements, receipts for damages, sworn affidavits, surveillance footage, technical analysis from Benji, and digital documentation proving the scope of the redirection program. Our co-plaintiffs included Janice Holbrook, the Millers, and the Ortizes. The fifth house, the one I hadn't recognized, belonged to a retired schoolteacher named Rosario Velasquez. She'd moved to Florida after her forced eviction, too afraid to return. When Rick reached out, she cried for 10 minutes straight before agreeing to testify via video. The courtroom was packed on day one. Media trucks lined the parking lot. A reporter tried to shove a mic in my face on the steps. I told her I'd talk after the trial, once the people who'd tried to erase us were held accountable. Karen looked tired in court, paler than I remembered, her hair gray at the roots, her posture defensive instead of proud. She avoided my eyes. She avoided everyone's. Her lawyer tried to pivot hard into miscommunication and decentralized authority. They claimed she wasn't aware of what her subordinates were doing, that the board was acting under extraordinary assumptions of compliance responsibility. Judge Moreno looked like she'd heard this music before. The prosecution tore it all down piece by piece. Every forged document, every fake signature, every resolution that bore no legal weight. They played the videos. They brought out county officials who testified that Karen had filed falsified maps and jurisdictional overlays to make it seem like our homes were within Granite Crest borders. She even tried to claim I'd agreed verbally to be part of the HOA. That's when Rick pulled out the signed letter I'd sent to the board 2 years prior, explicitly declining membership, referencing California Civil Code 1352-108. Their case cracked right there. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a method. And then came the final blow. Benji had pulled GPS metadata from Karen's own phone, publicly posted from a real estate seminar the year before, where she gave a presentation titled Enforcement Without Authority, Expanding HOA Control. The slides included photos of my cabin. Labeled non-compliant adjacent parcel, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. By the end of week 3, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict, guilty on all civil counts. Karen was ordered to pay over $2.2 million in restitution, punitive damages, and compensatory claims, split among the 5 plaintiffs. The judge also ruled that any future attempt by Karen or any former Granite Crest official to serve on a homeowners board would be considered contempt of court. Rick looked like he wanted to pop champagne right there in the courtroom. As for me, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Not until sentencing day came around, and I watched Karen stand in front of the judge, clutching her prepared statement with trembling hands. "I only wanted to keep the community safe," she said, voice barely a whisper. Judge Moreno stared at her over the bench. "You abused your power. You violated homes, lives, and laws. Safety does not justify tyranny." And then she delivered the sentence. 10 years, no parole for the first 6, plus a permanent ban from managing, consulting, or administrating any residential community. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could finally breathe again, and for the first time in a year, my house felt like mine. A year passed. The snow melted off the roof in slow sheets. My trail cams hadn't picked up a soul in months, and the silence that used to feel like tension now felt like peace. The forest had swallowed the boundary lines again, like it was reclaiming what all the HOA nonsense had tried to fence in. Karen was serving her sentence at the Central California Women's Facility. I never heard from her again. I didn't expect to. Her name occasionally popped up in news blurbs. Former HOA president convicted in illegal eviction scandal. But after the sentencing, public interest moved on. Mine didn't. Janice got her home back. So did the Millers and the Ortizes. Rosario never came back to California, but with her settlement money, she bought a condo near her grandkids in Tampa. We still emailed sometimes. She sent photos of a cat she named Karen. I laughed harder than I should have at that. Granite Crest HOA was officially dead. The state revoked their charter, and the remaining residents voted to become an unincorporated neighborhood under county oversight. No more boards. No more secret votes. Just people trying to live without becoming someone else's property line. As for me, I rebuilt. Not the walls. They were still standing. But I replaced the locks, tore out the fake code box Karen's crew had installed redundant security systems, cameras with thermal imaging, and a new drone monitoring system that synced to my phone. Every time something larger than a rabbit crossed my driveway, I knew. I also took the settlement money, 7 figures, and did something I hadn't planned. I set up a legal defense fund for victims of HOA abuse, not just in California either. Rick helped me file the paperwork for a nonprofit. We called it Sloan Line Defense. I became a guest speaker at property rights conferences, told my story a dozen times, gave interviews, helped 3 other families fight off illegal HOA land grabs in the Sierra foothills. I wasn't looking for a second career, but somehow, one found me. I guess once you survive having your life ripped apart by a power-drunk HOA president, it's hard to sit quietly while it happens to someone else. One spring morning, I walked the edge of my property and saw a fresh set of boot prints near the old HOA line. My first instinct was to tense up, but then I saw the small wooden sign someone had hammered into the dirt just on the other side. "Welcome back, Mr. Sloan. Thanks for standing your ground." No name, no initials, just those words. Maybe it was from one of the neighbors. Maybe from someone who used to be afraid of Karen and finally found their voice. I didn't touch the sign, just left it there, where it belonged. A marker that said, "This place is mine," and I fought to keep it that way.